production, and that was a long drawn-out deal. That I usually go with the two-sentence type deal, like here's John. I don't like to hear that stuff, and I know you don't either. But anyway, I'm the agronomist that works at the Dixon Springs Ag Center, and as most of you know in here, with the restructuring of the research mission at the University of Illinois, my research station is one of them that will be closed down. My last day with the university will actually be April 1st, so I'm kind of a short timer here. But I have really enjoyed this part of my career in working with the agronomy research, and Emerson and Carl Bradley and Mike Gray and others at the university. And you know, we've got a lot of things going, and these things are all run on funding. It sure didn't have anything to do with a lack of work, because there was a lot of interest in replicating statewide projects at the offsite research, and there was a lot of contract work for industry that went on at the various research farms that may not have gone on at Champaign. A lot of the things that I did were for nitrogen stabilizer products and different production products that I worked with industry to do that were more fit for the southern Illinois climates, our soil types, the geography, and everything involved in that. So, you know, everybody kind of had their mix of projects that they did. That's just a little show you of the farms that we did. And I'm kind of lost at this point, because I figured that we started, by the time that we got in the first of the year and started with our wheat applications that we made in our wheat projects, got the corn and soybeans planted, and did everything that we needed to do through there. We ended up taking a little bit over 2,000 individual plots to yield, and to get all that done, there was about 16,000 individual applications that needed to be done in operations on each one of those plots there. So it kept three of us hopping to do this, and I kind of like that picture. So we'll move on to other things now. But you know, I would like to thank the Soybean Association and as well as the Corn Growers, you know, Illinois Farm Bureau, for a lot of the support that they've given to our research station in particular through the course of the year. And we'll roll on now. But anyway, some of the double crop things that we see, and there's probably no mystery to any of these. With every opportunity, there is a challenge, and if you look at the challenge side of the thing, you see weather showing up a lot. You know, there's nothing that we're going to talk about in here that's going to be any secrets, and I kind of you know, it bothers me to be in crowds and listen to conversations where folks talk about the mysteries of double crop production as if there's some low-hanging fruit that you guys are missing out on, you know, employing in your production practices that are going to drastically increase yields. There are things that can be done to maintain yields and to make sure that you lay a foundation and have a plan to where you can do as good as the season will allow you. But you know, everybody knows that when we're dealing with the shorter growing seasons and all of the weather issues that we get, especially when you get from here south, you know, there's just a lot of challenges that the crop has to make up for that it doesn't have the ability to in a full season situation in these short things. So you know, we see the opportunities of profit, and we'll get into some budget things real quick. You know, farm diversity, spread out our workload, cash flow issues, all of those things kind of fit into there. And then on the challenges side with the weather, you know, the biggest thing is to get the wheat out of the ground or out of the field and get the soybean stand established as quick as possible. And that can present us with some you know, some challenges in certain years and certain conditions, and then we're always fighting the frost and, you know, what we have with the season to work through. So, you know, just a lot of different variables that we've got to deal with, and anything that goes wrong tends to be a bigger magnified result than we do when we deal with production in a full season situation at times. So anyway, I get sort of discouraged when I go to meetings sometimes and we focus on just one thing. I've been to a lot of seminars and workshops through the course of my history in farming and research and extension in Illinois agriculture. And, you know, we look at wheat production. Okay, we're going to talk about wheat. And this one we're going to talk, we've been to them where they just had field days where we just talked about double crop beans. And I think that it's one of the most important things that you can do as a producer to help yourself is to not look, you know, we tend to split corn production and bean production, but when we talk about our planting wheat, we've got to consider the issues involved with double cropping as part of that, to help us, you know, be as efficient as we are in our systems, and to take advantage of things and to sort of counteract some of the problems that we get into. So, you know, we've got to, all the benefits of this rotational system are only going to be realized if we maximize both the wheat component and the double crop soybean component of that. So as we look at our budgets and things that we'll look at, and all of this information that, or the budget wise, that it comes out on Farm Doc, and you know, you can pull it up on the computer and look at these projections through the course of the planting season and then the year to follow. But you know, we've got to make the most of both of these crops if we're really going to capitalize on the system. So, you know, all kinds of budgets that we get into, and we can see, you know, always the numbers are important, and we can see that our projections for this looks at double crop soybean revenue through history from 2009, and then the projections for this year as well. So we can see that, you know, the actual, I don't know if I've got a pointer on this thing, but don't hit that button. But Anyway, all of these things, it shows you that the return, you know, there is profitability through the years that's available. We're entering into a cycle at this point where it doesn't matter what crop we're talking about, but the revenue projections are constricting just with the way things are going in the markets. But you know, look at these things. There we look at all of the different comparisons, looking from continuous corn to corn following soybeans. And when we get out to those last two columns, when we look at the profitability of the wheat and the double crop system, and there, you know, it's it's not great. But then again, when we look back at these other numbers, those things aren't necessarily great anyway. And I think one of the things that we can look at as we get a little bit farther into the presentation, that we'll see that it's not necessarily that the wheat double crop soybean rotational considerations are ever going to have a tremendous advantage over corn and soybean production, because just think about how the markets work. You know, we get into a situation where people are down on wheat and the acreage planting intentions get to a certain way, the market will come up and it'll end up buying acres, and you know, it all kind of balances out through the course of the year. But we'll look at it's just the idea that the wheat and double crop beans is fairly competitive in this area of the world. As we move north, those factors might change a little bit, but I think with some other things that we'll talk about coming down the road, you know, those the double crop and wheat production area in our part of the world in Illinois and across the Midwest might expand or have the ability to at some point. One of the things I'd like to talk about here for just a little bit is a long-term rotation study that was conducted at our Brownstown research facility. That's, I don't know, I've never gone to Brownstown from here, so it's not too far down the road towards St. Louis. But anyway, kind of between here and Vandalia, and maybe just a little bit south. But this rotation study, it looked at different components of production with continuous corn. It had corn-soybean rotation in there, 2 years of corn followed by a year of soybeans, and then a wheat component of the rotation, and it was fixed in there to where we were looking at that where the wheat followed corn and the wheat following soybeans. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rotational systems that were looked at in this. It was all done no-till. So if we look at these through the course of the years, you know, as what the influence was on corn yields, and you can see along the bottom about what rotation we were talking about, And then the corn in the years where we had corn in those rotations, you can see that there was a difference. But once we get away from the continuous corn, which doesn't work very well in that part of the world anyway, you know, in the rest of those rotations, everything was fairly you know, in the same ballpark there. So, and when we get to the rotations where wheat was involved, our corn yields were actually just a little bit more. Not that it was to a significant level, but you know, you can see that there was a bump there in the years that we had corn. So we've got something going on, but it didn't really matter whether we were looking at the wheat following corn or the wheat following soybeans. We were seeing some positives as far as the corn yields. As we look at the soybean component of that, you know, we've got the start out in the 40s. We look at what our wheat yields were, and our wheat yields ended up, depending on how we did it, it was the same average yield over this thing. And then we look at the double crop yields that were, you know, not quite what we would want, but you know, they were consistent for the area. And I think that's another thing that we point out here, is that when you look at the budget projections that you'll see on the Farm Doc website and the different things that Nick and Gary and others talk about, they're talking about averages. Well, let's think about what an average is. An average is something that's in the middle. So we've got 50% below that, we've got 50% above that. So when cash rents, whatever the average cash rent is, well, there's a lot of them that go higher and there's a lot of them that go lower. Are you the average? Well, in a lot of cases, I think that when we see the wheat, I think that on my average, and I'll just throw this out, but I think that the farmers and the farming operations in this part of the world that have wheat in their rotation as something that is planned from year to year. Now, the acreage might fluctuate, but if you've got wheat in your rotation from year to year, there's probably a pretty good idea that you're a little bit better than average. Your wheat yields are probably a little bit higher than the 58 and some of the projections that we're seeing on the website, and as well as your double crop situation is probably going to be a little bit different too. So I would encourage you that, you know, it's easy to sit in the back row with a cup of coffee and a donut and listen to our economists talk, and it's all gloom and doom and things. And granted, we're in a downturn here, but if you plug your yields into there, that I think in a lot of cases will be better than those averages that they report in there for a lot of our operations. You know, it's not necessarily as bad as it might seem in some cases. Another thing with this information, we're looking at a study, and I know that sometimes you see research information and you think, well, you know, they're dealing with small plot research. They're dealing with 10 feet wide and 40 feet long and little equipment and this, and how is this applicable to my 500, you know, 1,000, 5,000 acre, whatever type of acreage that you're dealing with. And I think that it's important to point out when we deal with this, it's one thing, any type of data that you look at, whether it's small plot data or it's field size data that they're capturing information with yield monitors on, be concerned about the time frame that we're looking at this. This is a long-term study run from 2004 to 2014. So this study, all of these average numbers that I'm going to talk about here, they've got a lot of variables incorporated into those averages, you know, how the weather fluctuated, what the rainfall was, the temperatures, the planting dates. There's a lot of things that don't get pointed out in here that are kind of averaged out. Or if you look at information like this and you're looking at a 1-year or a 2-year study, and I don't care whether it's small plot or big plot data, be cautious about things like that and ask a lot of questions about why that information turned out what it was. When we're dealing with long-term studies like something like this, a lot of those variables have sort of been flattened out in the situation that is reported, where when you just look at 1 or 2 years of information, depending on how many sites that you've got, if you just include X number of the good sites in your what you report, you know, you can make things look however you want. So just be cautious about that on any type of research that you see, whether it's in a presentation like this or in marketing. Is there a question?
Back there a couple frames, were you saying the best corn yields were from
in that one?
wheat double crop soybeans.
In this study, over the 10 years of the project, the corn yields where in the rotations where wheat was included, what tended to be just a little bit higher than that.
So that would actually be wheat, or soybeans, wheat, soybeans.
Yeah, the difference between these two, both of these in rotations there is where the wheat was included. The difference in that is whether the wheat was planted following soybeans in the rotation or it was following corn. So, you know, and they'll tend to be, when you plant into corn stalks, you'll have different disease issues and things, and you know, it can be a little bit more challenging working with the residue to establish.
Never did that rotation before.
Yeah.
I know it's a challenge to get corn established.
It is, and I'm not saying.
If you get a big rain within a couple days of planting the corn on that wheat stubble, is there an allelopathic effect on corn following double crop bean stubble?
The corn's behind double crop beans.
No, what we're talking about here, and what you're talking about would enter into it. But you're not going to plant corn stalks into wheat. You're not going to plant corn.
Where you're planting the corn after the double crop bean stubble
Mm-hmm.
is 3 bushel less than if you go soybeans after the double crop bean stubble and then go corn.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never done it that way, but it makes sense. It's a challenge to get the corn
Well, and again, that 3 bushels right there, if we do the statistics on that, I'm showing you averages right here. The 3 bushels there, I can guarantee you that wasn't a significant yield difference. So if we look at that over time, there's basically, you can look at those 3 bushels and just pretend like it's the same. You know,
it probably was not 3 bushel for 10 years. It was 30 bushel 1 year, and it was no change the other 9 years or something. Probably.
No, I doubt if it was that much. But you know what we're saying here is basically it's the same with no more difference than that. Yeah, bushel's a bushel, but you know, over that much of time, it really wasn't a big deal. But so if we look at what the yields were there, you know, our wheat yields were basically the same in those rotations, and the double crop yield, it really didn't matter at that point. You know, we really wouldn't expect it to, because the impact that the corn or bean rotation would have at the double crop after at that stage, we wouldn't expect there to be any difference really in the double crop of that. We're more looking at the influence of the wheat and the crop it followed, and then the corn and soybeans in the subsequent years. Basically, what we're looking at here is if we look at the returns to these different rotations over time, you know, there was a little bit higher there in that last column, you know, versus the corn soybean rotation. But again, it's not that we're looking at, okay, I'm going to go corn soybeans because this study showed that it was $4, $5, $6 more. You know, it happened to be. But what we need to think about is that, you know, with the exception of probably the continuous corn on that Brownstown site, which probably wouldn't be a very good thing to do on a regular basis anyway, all of these other, the normal corn soy rotation that we would do if we look at 2 years of corn followed by that, and then the wheat, those numbers up there are pretty close. So what we need to think about here is just the competitiveness of the wheat and double crop program in your production system from 1 year to the next is usually there. You know, it's going to ebb and flow with everything else, but the competitiveness of that wheat and double crop part of the rotation is there. If we update that and with the information and the yields from that long-term study with the 2016 projections, it changes things a little bit. But you know, there again, everything is fairly well competitive. So you know, it's not to say that if I'm looking at, you know, 177 versus 186 on a corn soybean rotation, is that enough, you know, to say, well, no, I don't want that in there? And I'd say probably not, because we all know that the market influence and the amount of wheat that makes it through the season, and there's always some of it that is going to be you know, terminated, and we're going to plant corn into it or beans for one reason or another. But you know, just the competitiveness of the yield or of the returns to that situation is there. Here's here's some information that you talked about on the wheat. This is kind of a busy slide here. There's 3 bars, and there was 20 different treatments looked at in this wheat study, but it was conducted, the same 20 treatments were replicated 4 times. After they were no-tilled after beans, they were tilled after beans, and behind corn stalks where the blue one is. So, you know, if we look at these things, you can see that there was an advantage. The red bars tend to be the maximum on those, and it was just a matter that was where the beans were tilled. That doesn't mean that there's going to be that it makes sense to work every acre of ground, but in this situation, you know, that's what we saw. But anyway, we're looking here at, there's different nitrogen studies that are going on there. So the first 3 columns, we're looking at different rates of nitrogen supplied by urea. The next 3 would be the same nitrogen rates with ammonium sulfate and then UAN. And then as we move out, we're looking at different factors involved with bringing in and out things like fungicide treatments at the flag leaf. Did we treat for the fungicides at the head? Did we split nitrogen applications and those types of things? But you know, these are situations and considerations that you want to make to maximize your wheat component of that rotation, because both of them is important. So if we talk a little bit about the wheat component of that, the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we choose a high yielding variety with good scab resistance, and then turn around and have a planned fungicide program to aid in that scab control. We know we've had a couple back-to-back years to where the problems with fusarium in our wheat to end up the year was really made things some challenges. But the most important thing that you can do to set the stage for successful wheat production is in your variety selection. And I know it doesn't probably show up as good in this picture as it did on mine, but you can see that this wheat over here, you agree that looks a little bit better than this. You can kind of see some brown and things in there. The only thing that wheat at that stage wasn't treated with the fungicide. We're just looking at the varietal resistance to that disease in there. So knowing that wheat, when you plant it across some of our fields where there's always variability, you're never going to be able to get in there and apply that fungicide treatment when every wheat plant is at that stage. So you've got to hedge your bet, and with a variety that has good fusarium resistance and a planned fungicide treatment, we can work on that. You know, it might also be situations where we want to apply a fungicide earlier at the flag leaf stage if we've got things like striped rust that showed up on a few of our plots last year. You know, insecticide if we've got some army worms that are coming in. But we need to protect that wheat crop. But the good variety selection is very important to that. And we'll move through. I've got a lot of stuff. I tell you what, these sessions here, we could probably stay here all day if you guys would like to. I need the hour session in the big room. These concurrent sessions are rough. But another thing that I encourage people to do is figure out how much P&K that you need to support whatever your wheat and soybean yields. I know that there is some talk that people have seen advantages to applying fertilizer, you know, wait and apply it right in front of the double crop planting. There are situations where that might be an advantage, but overall it doesn't. It's just a matter to have the soil built up to the level where it needs to be and have the nutrients available in there. You know, in a year where we've got a wet wheat harvest and we've got to plant the beans wet, do you want to run through that field with a floater truck and deal with compaction issues and things like that? I'd say no. Again, the fly-free date is something that will help us with our wheat management. Soil fertility, these things are in the agronomy handbook, but we want to have our P&K levels built up to a certain point. The only thing that I would point out here when we talk about phosphorus that you want to be careful of, if you're applying for both crops and you're in a field that is in need of some buildup, don't put on too much DAP, because we don't want to get have too much fall nitrogen put on, because that can give us some problems in our wheat. So, you know, as long as we're putting on probably below 250 pounds of DAP, we're fine. But if we get up into that 300-pound level or more and fall applied, we might want to look at you know, switching to triple and some of that, or in that case, it might make sense to split some things, but But anyway, as we get to this and we say, well, yeah, you can say those things and do it. You want to say something?
Where do you find triple?
Huh?
Where do you find?
That's a good question.
If you're running a soil test and you need some buildup, more than likely you're going to have 250 or 300 pounds.
That's right, and that builds into another part of this is that if you're in a field that you're going to be working into a wheat in the rotation at some point, be planning ahead and put those bigger shots on in front of your corn crop. Probably, that'd be what I would recommend. But if you find yourself in a situation where you need to put on a big shot of phosphorus, don't over apply the DAP. Keep your nitrogen right, probably 40 pounds or under, and that would be good. If you got to put on 50, maybe, but you're probably not going to get any advantage to the wheat by putting on, and could, in certain situations, get a little bit too much growth and cause you some problems. But as far as the issue with splitting the application, though, for the double crop on P and K, Steve Ebelhair, my predecessor at Dixon Springs, and Fabian Fernandez, who was the soil fertility specialist at Illinois for a few years, they did a long-term study down there. This just points out the yields in 2008 and 9. There were it went longer, but this is how it clipped out to fit in this slide the easiest. But I think what this shows is that if you look at the yields over here, this was done at Brownstown, at SIU's Belleville Research Station, and Dixon Springs. There was no impact from a positive sense in splitting the application and applying phosphorus and potassium in front of the beans. I would point out this is my addition down here, that if you are dealing in a situation where your soil test levels are low, there are situations where putting an extra shot of fertilizer on ahead of those beans, you could get some bump and see some benefit out of that. But all things equal, that the split is not something that is going to be advantageous in most years if your soil test levels are where they should be. When we get into the double crop situation, the bean component of it, the big thing here is the growing season that we've got to deal with. And we can look at these charts in the National Weather Service site, and this comes out of the agronomy handbook. We're going to have a killing frost on average somewhere in between October 14th and October 21st, in this part of the world. And at that point, on October 22nd on average, we're not going to have much bean growth going on, so we need to look at how we can get that pushed back and make the most of that. As far as what we've got to deal with, a soybean that we plant in a double crop situation is usually going to need about 90 days. We need a 90-day window on average to get, and it doesn't really matter what maturity group that we're looking at. We want to plant a full season variety or close for your area in order to take advantage of as much of that growing season that we need, but we don't want to stretch it out significantly more than that and have a super full season bean that wouldn't be suited to that area, because more years than not you're probably going to get hit by frost situations in that. Another thing to think about, we want to have make a point to have some type of strategy in our seed selection. But if we do get into a year where our planting date is pushed significantly back, and I'd say for most of us in this area, a late double crop planting date is probably going to be, if we get that 10th of June time period on, or I'm sorry, 10th of July period and later, we might look at switching half a maturity group earlier to make that up. This chart here shows some work that was done over at Indiana, Purdue's research farm at Vincennes, and it just shows the differences in yield, or what percentages of yield we could get depending on different maturity groups of beans that are planted at and this was planted in a double crop situation here. So and over there in that area in those years, the double crops were fairly competitive. If we're looking above 80% and almost to 100% with some of those maturity things, they were they were getting the conditions to do things right. But those are things to consider. This just shows the factor of how long it takes these different maturities to reach physiological maturity on there, and we're looking at ranging from a group 3 being out to a 4.5. We're looking at anywhere from 80 to 100 days before that to be harvestable, so we don't get caught by the frost. So I put those graphs up there and steal some stuff from my buddy Sean at Purdue just to show you that I'm not talking off the top of my head. Somebody did do some research on this stuff. But if we look at planting date by maturity too, this was a study that was done by Jake Vossenkemper, who was one of Emerson's graduate students that he had done while he worked at Pioneer before he came back to work on his PhD, to look at two different planting dates and different maturity yields on this. And we're at June 21st, so the bottom yield, and this was not in double crop, but this just shows kind of some of the differences that you can get at that later planting date, and some of the variety selection criteria that you might want to consider. He did this at Belleville. There was one at Brownstown, and we've got graphs that are Urbana. But as we move north, we saw that later planting date and really reduce yields down. So there's a lot of different things that we need to think about. This is an interesting slide right here. This actually, I got this from Pioneer, and they looked at very, very late planting dates that were not in a double crop situation, but it was basically prevent plant type things. They were planting, and some of these were in pretty good soils where wheat wouldn't be a factor anyway. But we're looking at July 15th all the way out to August 14th. Planting dates and kind of the impact on yields. But you can see once we're getting in July 20th here, there's still some pretty good yields that were out there for later planting. And these were, the variety selection would have been similar to what you would have picked for a double crop choice at those planting dates. The population range was interesting. There was some of these were planted up to 250,000 plants per acre. So, if you're dealing with a short growing season, your beans are going to be shorter, and if you're going to have any yield out there at all, you've got to have a lot more shorter plants to be able to be in the ballpark on that. But we'll just throw that out there, and I appreciate their sharing of that. But as far as planting management in normal considerations, I'd like to look at starting out at least 180,000 and up to 220, depending on what your situation. I know that's a wide range, but everybody's kind of going to have the whole take-home point in this is that a lot of the, and we can talk about that later, but a lot of the information that we see as far as row spacings and populations and things, you'll hear a lot about the adaptability of the soybean plant to where we can get away with cutting our populations. And that's true to a certain extent if we're looking at a full season scenario. When we get into the double cropping, things are a little bit different. So we can kind of see some of the impacts there. And I wouldn't be too concerned about this. I'm sure that they'll have this on a website to look at it at some point. But we'll get to, we're looking here at full season planting rates, and we're looking up to 200,000 there. So you can see that we're, 50,000, 100,000 in a full season scenario, and there's cases to where we can get away with lower populations. But in the double crop situation, we want to jack that population up and keep that there because we're going to be challenged with the shorter growing season challenge. And you see all kinds of things in these things. Some of the information that Carl Bradley had gathered with some of his double crop fungicide projects that he did at Dixon Springs and Brownstown, and we'll scan through this really quick here because we're just out of time. But basically, looked at a lot of different products, whether it was fungicides or seed treatments, and in a lot of cases, in every case there was some variation there, but we really didn't have years where the disease pressure was to to the point where you could test that. And so there wasn't any significance in that. That's what we're saying. You know, the graphs, you'll see the yields will fluctuate a little bit, but all of these things were, the yield differences were non-significant when all the, and that doesn't go to say that there's no need to consider fungicide applications on double crop beans. It's just something that where if you do that as a regular practice in a full season situations, the conditions are different in that double crop situation. So you probably want to employ more crop scouting and make sure that you really do need it, because in a lot of the things that we have looked at, the returns just weren't there on a regular basis of that. Not to mean that it couldn't. So we can, there's a lot of things here. Also looked at seed treatment, and you know, most of the beans will come, seed beans that we buy will come treated with something. By and large, those seed treatments are on the market to help us in times when we've got wet, cold conditions early on in the year. Those aren't the same conditions that a double crop bean crop is going to have to encounter. So, you know, it may or may not be something that you'd want to look at. But, you know, some additional, yes, Eric.
I know they say that a lot of times, that you don't need fungicide treated seed for double crops because you're later and the soils are warmer. But you only got one chance to get a stand.
That's right.
And we have found that you typically will get a better stand if you use fungicide seed.
If I was giving a recommendation, I would say definitely utilize them, but you know, the studies that we have run showed that there wasn't a big impact from that. Not that there couldn't be, and I'm sure that there is. You know, on a regular basis, you'll see some difference in that. But as far as that calculating out into the yields of the trials that we did, you know, this isn't saying that if it shows up on here, absolutely do not do it. It's just the report of how the research showed up in our situations. Other things that have been tossed around for considerations to influence double crop beans, the 15-inch wheat. You know, the whole idea of that is basically allow for double crop interplanting and reduce residue challenges. In those situations, you know, it may be something that you can work on your farm, but by and large, the reduction that we're looking at in the wheat yield is something that you're probably not going to want to put up with over time, because the reduction in the wheat yield over the 15-inch row versus the narrow row, if you've got any acreage at all, even if you don't own a drill, you're probably going to be money ahead to go rent a drill and have that, bring that cost back in, because you'll more than make up for that with the narrow road. High moisture wheat harvest is another thing to get the wheat out of the field earlier, and that's something that folks are looking at. I guess the caution there is that it's different drying wet hot grain in into June and July than it is to dry corn in the fall when it's 60 degrees and very low humidity. So if you're going to do that, you know, talk with your bin folks. Make sure you've got the air movement in those bins that's sufficient to keep the grain in good quality. New earlier wheat varieties is something that folks are looking at. You know, new varieties coming out all the time, and I'd encourage you to look at those. I do know that there has been situations in our variety testing trials in this last year where some of the newer earlier varieties did very well in the northern variety testing sites, and when we brought them down into more where the traditional wheat areas in the state were to the south, they really took it on the chin where the disease pressure was worse. So if you do look at the earlier varieties, make sure that you get a good disease-resistant package along with that, and not pick just for maturity. Because again, if you don't maximize the wheat, it's probably not gonna work things. So with that, I think that's about all I've got, and I believe we're out of time, aren't we? Didn't we go till 11?
Till 11, yeah.
What? It's 11:02 by my watch, isn't it?
We've got a few minutes for questions.
Okay. If anybody's got any questions, I've got a couple more funny slides to look at, but you don't need to do that. But anyway, I was just getting warmed up here. But I appreciate your time and effort to be here today, and the Soybean Association for doing that. So I hope you got a little bit to chew on. But, you know, basically, I think the big thing here to take home is that, you know, you're probably doing about all you can to do things as good as you can, but you've got to lay the foundation. You know, fertility is important. What can we do to make sure that we get good seed to soil contact and get the stand in the double crop is just key. I would prefer to have as narrow a row as I could possibly get, but I know when we get into high residue situations and we get some of the advantages with the 15-inch planters with the better down pressure and better row cleaners and things like that, probably in a lot of cases you're going to get better stand using a better planter that's 15-inch rows than we will out of some of the drills, especially if they're older. So, you know, that's the big thing there.
They've tried the relay cropping in the past, and is that, anybody even produce the
No.
the late emergence soybeans and everything? Polymer coated soybeans?
I guess you can get anything that you want to order, but it's not a practice that we would.
Fielder's
You know.
Choice, I think, did it, and they aren't in business anymore, and
Well, I don't know. You know, it's something that we might, and there again, there's going to be changes, especially in these earlier wheat varieties, that I think we're just kind of on the tip of that right now, and there's an opportunity there, you know, with the right earlier variety moved in, you know, that might make a significant game change for a lot of us, as well as expand the potential for people to grow wheat and double crop beans successfully farther to the north with that. So, you know, there's a lot of different angles to look at this from. But anyway, I appreciate your time. We need to get on to the next session. But if you have any questions, I'll be around the rest of the day. Feel free to track me down or give me a call at Dixon Springs, and enjoy the rest of your day.